What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Art Shack. So to go along with my video of the basics of different types of pencils, I'm going to show you, just basic different types of textures that you can create. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically use the pencils that I would typically use in a drawing. I just need to find a 2B. Here we go. I don't know where that one went. So I'll do a quick recap. So the pencils that I use normally within a drawing, I'm just going to draw in some quick lines so that I know where the camera frame is. That way I don't go ahead and draw off the camera here. Alright, so something like that. Alright, so here is the lightest pencil that I use. It's a 4H pencil. The other pencils that I use, here's a 2H, you can see it's a bit darker. Then HB. Here's a B, which is really just a 1B, but they just call it a B. Here is a 2B. And here is a 4B. 4B is about the darkest I'll go within a drawing. Now the first thing I'll show you with the different textures is just to show you the typical standard textures of the original pencils as is. So a 4H has a very, very nice and smooth texture. There's almost no texture to it at all, which is really nice for drawing things like water and things like that. It just does a really, really nice application of that. A 2H has a slight texture to it, and it's a bit darker. This one is a very versatile pencil. You can draw many different things, ranging from tree foliage to grass to different ground textures and things like that. Now, when you start getting into the HB and B ranges, the pencil has a significant amount of texture to it as you apply it to the page. So things with a lot of texture like this helps a lot when you're drawing just simple ground surfaces and things like that. It just typically will do a lot of the work for you instead of trying to sit there and create these little itty bitty things of texture. These darker pencils will do it for you right off the bat, so it makes it a bit easier. You want to use your tools to your advantage so that way it's much easier on you. Here's a 2B, which gets significantly darker, and in most drawings a 2B is actually pretty much as dark as I'll go. It's quite rare that I'll reach for the 4B, only when I'm doing some really dark shadows, maybe under a rock or something like that, where I know there's going to be a very, very, very dark shadow. And you can see from this one, there's a pretty significant amount of texture coming out of it. Now, something else you can do with these is, this was a pretty medium application. I didn't press very hard at all. So going back with the 4H, if you press really hard, see with this one, it doesn't really do too much. But as you go through the pencils, it really changes. So this one will get pretty dark, surprisingly. You can see how much darker that is. And here is the HB. So this one gets pretty dark, and then you can see that the texture starts to go away. So depending upon the pressure that you apply to your pencil will allow for texture or not. So the harder you press, the more smooth of an application you're going to have. But just be careful, because trying to erase that is definitely going to prove to be a substantial challenge. A 2B gets very, very dark. And the 4B, I almost never use like this because it's pretty dark. I don't go much higher than a 4B, mainly because of the fact that I'm making videos for YouTube, and the light reflecting off of these will reflect back into the camera and will almost make these look like they're over in this range. They'll give them a really nice highlight and glow. which I don't, you don't want in your videos, because like I said, it's going to make it look like you have a really, really light tone there when it's really supposed to be very dark. If you need to go really dark, the Kimberly 9XXB is where you want to be. It doesn't have that high shine to it like the 9B pencil would. So this one is about as dark as I'll go. I hardly ever use this, but if you ever need a pencil that's really dark and don't want that reflective shine to it, this is the pencil to get. Or you can always use charcoal too. That's about the only other medium that I know that's like pencil that will get very dark without that shine. Alright, so I'm just reaching for one of my older videos that I did. This is way back in the beginning of the year. I did different things like this in a video, which I'm going to be covering again in this one, but I'm also going to be adding a couple different things to it. So I'm using it there just to kind of give me some ideas and reference and things like that. And I'm still going to be using my main pencils. I'm not going to really touch the really dark one. So the first thing I want to cover is, I believe, called Burnishing. And that's when you use... So here's like a 4H. I covered this a little bit in the last video, but I'll cover it again really briefly just so that anyone who didn't see that one can see it in this one. It's because it's very, very useful. So if you're drawing a texture, with a 4H, you can go over that with a B pencil. Doesn't really matter which one it is. So here's just a regular B. So I mean, you can use a 2B, a 4B, a 6B, a 9B, whatever you like. And it's going to preserve that original texture that you placed with the 4H, and it's just going to kind of darken it up, and it's going to add a bit of texture on top of that. And it's just something that you can do. I'll tend to do this when I'm drawing in some water and things like that. It just helps to add in some subtle textures that really help to give that image a nice, polished, clean look. You can also do this in the opposite. So here's a 2B. Just apply some quick texture with that, and then take a 4H and then shade over that. It's going to darken up the I think it was a 2B I did it with, or whichever B pencil it was. It's going to darken it just a little bit, but it's going to preserve most of that texture you just put down. So the most useful applications for something like this is if you're drawing, let's say, a tree branch. I mean, that's the most common way I'll do this. Draw the detail in with like a B pencil or something like that, and then go over it and shade it in with a 2H or 4H pencil, and it'll give it that really, really nice polished look. I'll show you. I actually got this one framed. Hopefully it doesn't reflect too much, but you could see in the tree branches there all the details that I have in. And then I shaded over it with like a 2H or a 4H, and it preserves all that texture and just gives it a nice look. So tree branches are a really, really good way to take advantage of that. One thing I also want to point out, so here's a 4H, is the difference between how different pencils blend between one another. So here's a 4H. Now I'm going to grab a clean blending stump, something like this, and I'm going to apply it pretty dark, or not pretty dark, pretty heavily, and just kind of try and blend this one out. The H pencils really do blend well, and all the texture of that pencil will disappear, which is nice. And you can see it just makes a nice, very, very light shadowed area. So, and then the difference is here's a 4B. I'll do the same thing. Of course, the harder you apply this to the page, the more difficult it's going to be to blend it. And then I'll blend this one out. You can see it's going to be much darker, and it's going to be slightly harder to make a really, really smooth transition between where you applied it to where you're blending it. You can still see the original application there. But if you apply it, if I do it really, really light, it'll come out a little bit better. Let's see how that does. Now you can still see the original source a little bit, but not as bad. So you can just keep that in mind. Alright, so here is probably one of my favorite things to do with textures of pencils or anything like that. Grab yourself something like this. I picked it up at a craft store. I don't know what this is called, but basically it's a stick with a needle on it. They're very sharp, so you want to be very careful with these. You don't want to be running around the house with them. That's definitely a no-no. So basically what you want to do with something like this is just make some scratches on the paper. Something like that. And then after those scratches are done, you can go back in. I'm going to use a B pencil. And if you shade over that, you can see, so I'm doing a little bit darker here so that way it comes up better on camera. You can see that all those areas that you scratched will show up perfectly. Now you're probably thinking, well, you know, what's the use of that? Anyone who is looking to draw facial hair or something like that, you know, I can't really draw portraits very well, but drawing any type of fur, even on the bird picture that I just had in the little feathers and things like that, I did this a lot in that drawing. So that's very, very useful to do. So it's really cool if you want to make really, really tight textures and things like that. And it just really helps out. And then other such things, it doesn't really matter what kind of pencil you do, but you can grab one, do like an underhand grip. So where you pinch it like this, and then you just grab the rest of it with your hand, something like that. And then you can just kind of go in and just kind of let your hand, you know, kind of do the work, I guess. I guess the most basic use or term for this would be like scribbling. And something like this is how I'll draw the foliage of my trees and bushes and things like that. And of course, wherever you have more, you know, a thicker area, you want to draw in a bit darker, and then when you get a bit further away, you want to make it a bit lighter. So here you can have, you know, a tree branch kind of sticking out, and you can have a bit of a thicker tree branch. So something like this, and then you can quickly go in and just kind of, you know, have a good time with drawing in some trees. But that's the basic texture that I'll do for those trees. Just something basic like that. And then of course, you know, you can always grab a pencil. I'm going to sharpen this one a little bit. And you can always go in and do more of like a circular scribbling, something like this. And this kind of, it's something nice to do if you're drawing in a river and you want to draw in, let's say, some rocks on the bottom and things like that, or just basic textures and details. Of course, I'm going to be spending a lot more time on it and things like that. But if you want to kind of get the water to look like it's flowing over it, I would do something like that, and then I would take a 4H and just go over it, something like that. And then of course I'd grab the eraser and kind of erase out some of the flowing water, something like that. So I mean, it's just an idea. That's typically how I would do it, but I would spend a lot of time doing something like that. So it may not come out as, you know, the best in here, but you can really, really experiment and play with your pencils. And just keep in mind that a 4B in general applications will have a lot more texture when you apply it than a 4H will. A 4H will have a much more clean application to it. So you can see there's a huge difference there. So if you're looking at an image and you see a lot of texture, you want to grab more of a 4B pencil. But if you see something that has, almost no texture at all, something like a piece of plastic, or maybe a beach, anything that's really smooth, water, definitely, you want to definitely grab for more of the H pencils. But if you want to darken it a little bit, like let's say if you want something that's really smooth but you need it to be much darker, here's a B. You can go along the same way, just really lightly. It'll give it a bit of texture, but it'll mostly keep that clean look to it. And then you can darken it up just by doing that. But most of the textures that I do for different drawings mostly lie within the same, bush and tree texture that I do so often. And then you can go off and do different grass textures, and this would require to be very, very quick and fluid on your pencil. Just something like that. And you want to make these different clumps here and there. So you just want to be very, very quick. But it's, it's all about experimentation and just getting creative with what you have. And having the eraser is always a big part of that. So you can go back in and just erase out different areas, and then shade some of those areas back in. So it's a back and forth process, but in the end, it's definitely going to give you a pretty big advantage. If you have an idea or two of different textures and things like that, you can come up with your pencils. But to be honest, the textures that just come off the pencils as they are a big help. You don't really need to get that creative. If you just can do something like this, just with a light application, you're gonna be able to do a lot. But of course, being able to blend and things like that. Cross-hatching is also a nice texture, and that's when you have something like this and you're going in one direction. Well, actually, this would just be hatching, what that would be called. Let me sharpen the pencil again. The one thing with B pencils is that they're so soft that they'll lose their tip really quick. So just going in one direction like this is called hatching. As soon as you change direction, it is then called cross-hatching. And that will make the original area much darker, and it's just a different texture that you can create. Cross-hatching usually applies for clothing and things like that. And then you can change the angle again. You can go as crazy as you want with these things. It'll get darker every time you do it. There's even artists that will take their pencil and just draw little dots on their page and use that to create images. Of course, that is very, very involved and takes a lot of time. It's called pointillism, I believe. If I'm wrong, I might be. I don't know. But basically, what it is, it's just making little dots and letting the contrast and of the darkness and lightness of them to kind of mix in your eye to create different tones and things like that, and eventually to create entire works of art, which doing something like this takes 10 to 15 times longer than any traditional drawing would, guaranteed, but it's just a different look. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is how you hold your pencil. If you hold it further back, let me switch the page here. If you hold it further back, you're going to have less control over it, and it's more for these fluid motions, things like that. So if you want to cover large areas, just go to town like this, holding your pencil way back. If you want to have a lot of control, obviously you want to hold it like you would a pencil, and then you can really, get in there. I'm just kind of scribbling. I'm not really doing anything creative here at the moment. But you can really get in there, and you're with the point of the pencil, so you're going to get a lot of sharp details doing things like this. But if you want to get that loose but controlled motion, switch to the underhand grip, and you'll get a very, very expressive but controlled look. And this is how I'll do most of my leaves and things like that from my tree branches and such and things like that. So keep all these things in mind, and just keep on practicing, and I'm sure that you'll get better as you go. But like I said, it's all takes time and practice, and most of all, you just want to have fun while you're doing it. So just keep that in mind. And it doesn't really matter too much what brand of pencils you're using. I happen to use Faber-Castell pencils. That's just what I've grown to like. I also have Creative-Color, Derwent, Stettler, but Faber-Castells are kind of what I've really grown to like. Not sure why, there's no reason, it's just kind of what I've gotten into. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this one. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all later. Take care. If you need to find more pencil textures, try going on Google and typing in pencil textures. I'm sure you'll get a couple hundred results there. And let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite pencil texture?